morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to episode 34 of the Blowback Roundtable. Our guest today is the esteemed international law expert, Christopher Black. And then we also have Ben and Carlo. Ben's in Hungary. Carlo is in Washington, D.C. I'm in the left coast. Chris is coming live from Canada. Is that correct, Chris?
Correct. Eastern Ontario, just in north of Lake Ontario. If you, I guess I'm about 60 miles north of Rochester.
Okay. So there's so much to discuss. We haven't had a program since Tuesday. A lot has happened. The biggest news, of course, is the ceasefire that got implemented today.
No C word. No C word. You're not supposed to use them. Even leaders can't use them. It is a humanitarian truce or pause. Yeah. C word.
That's an important distinction. Yeah. Thanks for correcting that. That's definitely true. So what are our thoughts about that? What do we think the likelihood is that it's gonna be maintained and last the duration it's intended to?
Do you want me to start that? Because it's so not really gaslighting to me, but it's a huge deflection, because apparently there was big diplomacy going on in the East. The Arab League, the Islamic Cooperation, something. These guys, a lot of people went first to Beijing to talk with Wang Yi, and then to Moscow to talk with Lavrov. There was an online BRICS meeting to address the situation, and then suddenly this came out, and the US took yes, we approve this humanitarian 4-day. I think it's a 4-day a truce, during which there's going to be a prisoner exchange and some aid getting in, and that's pretty much it. And they said yes, we approve it. But apparently Turkey, I got this from Pepe Escobar. Sorry, not Turkey, but Egypt. Was pretty much working out the details with Hezbollah, Israel, and Hamas. So these three actors, not the rest, not Iraq or Iran. And there was not a brilliant, but very revealing article on Politico. Maybe we should start there, from the US administration's point of view. And it had one concern that was alleviated, saying, oh, this might turn into the C word, the ceasefire. But given that it's Netanyahu, we're not worried about that. What we're worried about is reporters, journalists entering and showing the devastation in Gaza and further turning public opinion against Israel. That was the main worry in the article. And that's what's happened this morning, is when the not C word begins. That is a trap word. Yeah. So what's in the background of this?
Whether the pause turns into a ceasefire, that's unknown. We all hope it does, but the Israelis are promising after the 4 days they're going to go start their assault once more, even more heavier. That's their declared aim, but whether they mean that or not, we don't know. I think that the fact that they've agreed to this ceasefire, really, for 4 days, indicates that they're not doing too well in the fighting in Gaza. And the Hamas claims they've knocked out 335 armored vehicles, tanks, and jeeps and things like that in the last since they went into Gaza, on top of what they destroyed before, and on top of what Hezbollah is destroying in the north. So I think they're in some sort of trouble, and that's why they've agreed to it. But with the American massive aid flowing in, trying to replace all those lost vehicles, I don't know what they intend to do. But it's obviously it's a good thing that has happened. But where does this lead? I'm still afraid that, like a lot of people, it's going to expand into something bigger. That they're going to go back in, and all hell's going to break loose. But I think the Israelis aren't getting their way into Gaza yet. And I think they're facing a lot of problems and economic problems. Then you have I heard that Turkey, or private groups in Turkey, supported by the Turkish government, are sending 1,000-boat flotilla to Gaza to take in some aid to the people of Gaza. And I'm not sure when that's going to leave Turkey to approach Gaza, probably the next few days. And then what we have to see is whether the Israelis trying to attack that like they did the Marva in 2010 when they killed several Turkish soldiers on a ship.
So to be clear, that's not the Rafah crossing controlled by Egypt and
No,
Israel. That's actually coming by sea.
it's coming by sea. 1,000 boats they've
Wow.
arranged, private boats. But there'll be no doubt. But I guess the Israelis will argue that they may be shipping in Turkish soldiers on that, because Erdogan did say that a couple of weeks ago that soon there will be Turkish soldiers fighting in Gaza. And I'm sure the Israelis wonder what's really going to be on those ships, aside from aid.
True.
Turkish special forces going in disguise and helping the. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know if that's true. I don't want to provoke something like that, but I wouldn't be surprised.
It seems, I mean, Erdogan, he's a master of rhetoric, and he's very, a lot of things he says are rhetorical because he has to placate his population, but he's way more pragmatic, behind the scenes. It's tough to really trust what he says and believe that he's as on the side of the Palestinians as some of his rhetoric sounds. But I hope that's true. And that would be great, to have, just the spectacle of all these boats trying to, bring aid to Gaza, and then Israel's going to have to, and the U.S. too, would have to interdict them, probably in international waters, and it would just be a real eyesore, politically speaking, from a PR point of view, for the West, for the U.S. and Israel. I know we talked about this idea that there's some gas, some energy reserves found in Gaza, and this could be one of the objectives of Israel, opportunistically seizing on the events of October 7th, and not only clearing out northern Gaza, but consolidating their control over these energy resources. And I know Ben probably could speak better than I could to the location of these energy resources and how much they are and stuff like that.
Okay, true. It's about a trillion barrels. It's not huge when you compare it to places like Iran or Russia, but it is a substantial amount. And here, I think, I wanted to talk about the PR, the public relations aspect of it, because I think it plays a huge role in why there's a ceasefire in the first place. But let's go into energy, because I just found out that the deal to explore gas off the shore of both Gaza, Israel, Syria, that was all, it's set to expire in 2024, but it belongs to British Petroleum, BP. And apparently, even back in June, Mahmoud Abbas, the president, on paper, the president of Palestine, the head of the Palestinian Authority, right? He was in talks with Putin that maybe Russia could explore those gas reserves. That how much of way before the Al-Aqsa flood, right? Way before anything happened in Israel. Imagine what sort of a nightmare that would have been to the hegemonic order, which has always been, controlling energy. I mean, I think last time I mentioned how many electric vehicles are in Hungary. We can't just divorce from oil and gas, but I think that's replicated around the globe. So it's a lot. But basically, I read your article on New Eastern Outlook, the Neo Journal, and previously I read a couple of articles from Pepe Escobar, the Brazilian geopolitical writer who has his own style. And amazingly, you came pretty much, Christopher, to the same conclusion that it's not really about Gaza, even though we might talk about the legalities of just pronouncing a genocide since they have since 10/7, but it really wasn't about that. But the plan basically was Gaza's in the way. It's a nuisance to get that energy dominance for which Europe is desperate for at this moment. Budapest has the lowest gas prices in all of Europe, but all of that is spiked. They're trying to get Brussels and Washington to intervene because the Americans aren't really honoring their long-term agreements. They're giving spot prices. There's an energy crisis in Europe, and winter's coming. And that you talked about, I think, this Netanyahu with his board came to the UN or the G20, I forget, with his plan of IMEC, the Israel, Middle East, European Economic Energy Corridor, something like that. Mm-hmm. And that would have been basically the US plan that, an alternative, not basically a way to not counteract, but go around the BRICS, not the BRICS, but sorry, the Belt and Road Initiative.
Right.
That was both of your conclusions. I wonder if you.
Yeah, it seems. when the Chinese are worried about this, why they want to shut down the war in Ukraine if they can, because the war, if the Americans and Israelis and their allies set up this other alternate transportation route or hub, it would be used to block the Belt and Road, the Chinese intentions of building transportation infrastructure through the region into Europe, which they also wanted to do through Ukraine. So it's seen by the Chinese as an obstacle to fulfilling the Belt and Road Initiative objectives. So there's big stakes at play here with the Americans using this partly against the Chinese, also to maintain their hegemony over the region and Iran and the oil supplies there. So it has both purposes. Plus, I mean, because why are they supporting this Israeli state from 1948 on in the first place? Why did they create it? Churchill said in 1917 that we have to do this to further our own interests, and the Americans, Truman and Roosevelt, said the same thing. That's why they supported the establishment of Israel when everybody else in the Middle East opposed it.
Yeah. Way before a guy named Adolf came to power in Germany. Way before that.
Way before, yeah. I mean, it's been going on since the 1880s, and Herzl and all these people trying to approach the Ottoman Empire and get permission to establish a Jewish colony. I mean, there's always Jews in Palestine anyway, but to bring in more Jews and establish some sort of a colony or semi-state there. But the British finally did that after the First World War, and they break up the empire. The French and the British broke up the Ottoman Empire, seized Syria, Palestine, and Lebanon, and so on, and then decided to use the Jewish problem for Europe, which was exacerbated by the Nazis, to establish a Western fortress inside the Middle East. But you can almost see it as if they are like the old Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem and Accra and so on, and a Western bastion established in the middle of the Middle East to have their way. But yeah, so it's all about profits and money and hegemony over the region. But the wider region, as you just said, opposing China and the Belt and Road Initiative and trying to diminish China's rise, I suppose.
Do you know what's funny? That some of the military analysts that get into Defense One and portals like that, they talk about basically, what they said for Taiwan, which is the unsinkable aircraft carrier. They say it's a way for us to project power into the region. Like it's not something covertly done. It's perfectly overt. It's out there. They spell it out for you. So right. Absolutely right on that account. But yeah, it was never an energy hub before Israel. That would have been a new stroke in this history.
Right, and when we're talking about the oil and gas off the coast there, in Israel, Palestine, we also have to remember the conflict between Greece and Turkey for the oil and gas reserves further west, which they're fighting over, and Turkey also has an interest in this oil and gas field, the oil and gas fields in that region, because they claim that they own some of them, or all of them, depending on who's talking. So there's also an aspect, a drive for Turkey to be involved in this beyond the humanitarian aspect of helping fellow Muslims and Palestinians and so on.
Yeah, and Pepe Escobar has mentioned that one of the things they want to bring about is Haifa as the only viable port for receiving the reserves that are 20 kilometers off the coast of Gaza, and eliminate the port in Gaza, as well as the ports of Lebanon and Syria. That would give Israel a monopoly on that oil, accessing it and bringing it into the Middle East, and as well as exporting it out of the region. So that's one of the reasons that the bombing of Syria continues, the occupation of Syria by the U.S. continues, so on and so forth. So.
Yeah. Well, that's something which is never mentioned. There was one of the things missing from, as in my article, I said, when Austin gave his press conference and the talking heads were asking him questions. I was struck by the fact that he was going on about, oh, we're against aggression. We're, Russia's attacking sovereign countries, blah, blah, blah.
A lot of
Well,
rules-based order. Sorry.
right. And nobody, not one reporter said, well, wait a minute. You're still occupying and invading Syria. You're still invading and occupying Iraq. What about that? Or what about you invaded Iraq and Afghanistan? You just left Afghanistan a year ago or so, after 20 years of occupying it, destroying it. So where do you get off giving lectures to the world about that? Not one question. Not one reporter had the nerve to say it. But that would be an obvious question for a student journalist, right? But no.
Yeah.
But when those attacks took place, it was immediately the Western headlines were self-defense. We have to strike back against the Iraqi resistance for self-defense purposes.
Well, yeah, but an occupier has no legal right to self-defense. I mean, in practical terms, they're going to defend their forces, of course, but they have no legal right to self-defense as an occupation force. Because the resistance has every right to kick them out, and they have no right to defend themselves legally. And that's true with Israel as well, because even the International Criminal Court held 2019, and we discussed this before. When they opened a file on Israel, they found that the 90% of the territories are occupied by Israel, so therefore they're occupied territories. Therefore, Israel has no right to self-defense when resistance forces attack them. And Israel has committed war crimes. And they said Israel's committed war crimes. It's about events in 2014, but it still pertains. So Israel has no right to self-defense, and many other people have said that as well. Hamas does. Of course, practically the Israelis are going to defend themselves, but legally they don't have any grounds to stand on.
And not to mention Iraq. It's now a cliche.
Yeah.
They invaded Iraq after 9/11,
right.
Without any evidence. It was predetermined by the first I read of it was in a PNAC report, I think in the 1990s, they were waiting for an opportunity, for these opportunities to rise through 9/11. They went after Iraq, and there was no WMD. Ask Scott Ritter. There was no link between Saddam Hussein and radical fundamentalist groups who were diametrically opposed to each other.
Mm-hmm.
It was basically just the 9/11, the slaughter of 3,000 Americans, was used as an excuse to fill the coffers of U.S. military-industrial complex and rebuilding companies like Halliburton, for example, Dick Cheney's company.
Right.
It's cliche now. How grievous is that?
And today, 20 years after the war on terror was launched, they just looted another 90, I think, tankers from Deir ez-Zor, the occupied Syrian thing, to their little base in Iraq. That's just happening. It's out there. It's actually reported.
Carlo, you're suggesting Saddam did not have drones that could hit the West Coast within minutes? Because
yes.
I heard that.
Yeah,
like I was scared. I was scared of a nuclear weapon, Saddam's nukes, and those drones. Those drones were just minutes away from attacking the West Coast.
Well, the babies in incubators, they like to hash that up every time there's something like this. But.
Well, that's how the effectiveness of American propaganda, that people still accept this argument that if they had found weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, the attack would have been justified. Well, it wasn't. I mean, because what did the Americans do to crush Iraq? What did they use? Weapons of mass destruction. The American Army and armed forces were a weapon of mass destruction. They hit them. You see the cruise missiles flying in that first night of the attack, which they showed in the shock and awe to terrorize the world. I still remember that. You can still see the videos on TV. Why couldn't Iraq have weapons of mass destruction? Since the United States has the biggest arsenal of weapons of mass destruction in the world. So does Russia and China and France and Britain. I still don't understand why that was so effective, that story, that narrative, that they had weapons of mass destruction so we can go and attack them. Well, then we should be attacking the United States.
It's
Yeah.
the
The
reptile
whole world
brain.
should be.
Right.
You're not supposed to think deeply of it. It's supposed to
Oh,
elicit emotion, you
He
know.
was a madman.
he's
Sodom
a
and
Rape
madman.
Sodom.
rooms.
He
Rape
was a madman.
rooms.
Yeah. Well, they did the same thing with Yugoslavia. They, you know, Saddam was a madman. Libya, Gaddafi was a fascist. Milosevic is a madman, fascist, and a communist. So he was all three, and a criminal.
The
Um,
trifecta. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
you had a country. You have a country that believed that the Sandinistas were going to attack the United States through Harbingen, Texas. I mean, if you can believe that,
Yeah.
you'll believe anything. You'll probably believe that a guy with an antique, literally almost literally an antique Italian rifle, fired 3 bullets in under 5 seconds and blew off the head of the president
Oh,
without anybody else
it's
helping him out. It was just a,
Oh, I love Bill.
amazing.
it's anniversary day, isn't it?
Oh,
Today or
that's right.
50 years.
Yesterday, 22nd. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I love Bill Hicks' take on that. When you ever seen his thing on democracy when he the
Yeah.
coup? You ever been to that building to see it? I look out that window.
Yeah.
No, it's pretty effective.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they put out again a story about these fake stories. I think to link Hamas with Russia and the war on terror and Saddam Hussein, somebody put out a video, an old video claiming to be Osama bin Laden, stating he did attack New York, but they deserved it. And he
the
didn't. He wasn't
letter.
involved. Yeah, he wasn't involved at all. He always denied it. This is fake, but that's been going around. Then you get Bush repeating the old Vietnam domino theory in his op-ed article. If we don't stop the Russians in Ukraine, they'll be in Paris by Christmas. You know, it'd be a broader conflict. Well, who's starting the broader conflict except you? Yeah, these themes, they just keep repeating the same stories. They have the same patsies, the same scapegoats, the same, and people buy it. I mean, it's just amazing that people
It's
don't learn.
It's sort of depressing that the majority of people, maybe I don't think the majority, but people buy it in the US, maybe Canada. But I think this is hugely different, and this public relations aspect, public opinion aspect, could have been what forced this, at least this pause to happen, because this thing is on every smartphone. I've never seen like this amount of mutilated children, people under rubble. The horrific images really are everywhere, and that's why there's this increasingly in Europe like a huge reaction against what they call disinformation, hate speech, all of that. Like teaching it in, I think California introduced like media studies for primary schools or something like that, where they teach you disinformation, misinformation. It's not what I dreamt of. I wanted to have PR studies in primary school, so you know when you're being bullshitted. So it's going to be the opposite, you know.
Yeah.
But there's this huge backlash, and it was personified in a person. This guy who was a former Obama advisor, Stinkowitz, something, I'm going to quickly cheat on that name, who was harassing people. I'm really not happy that he got arrested, but he was harassing this halal Egyptian vendor. He's called Stuart Seldovitz. I don't know if you're all familiar with the story.
I am. Yeah.
Okay, so for years he harassed Muslim people, and before that Russian diplomats. Now there's videos coming up thanks to Grayson and people like that, and now he got arrested for hate speech. And maybe this is controversial, but I disagree with anything like that. He should be arrested for harassment, because that's what that was. And the reaction this guy had, and the videos that he did, is just a shock of we used to be able to get away with this. I could say I'm the best. I'm going to pick out the fingernails of your dad. I'm going to cook you in an oven. That sort of rhetoric came from him, and he used to get away with it because the empire, everything was on his side, and he's untouchable. And there's a lot of that, I think, going around. That no, you're not allowed to say shit like that anymore. So I think the public backlash has been huge, and maybe still understated.
Yeah, this is strange, or not strange, but remarkable in the sense that most people here in Canada support the narrative about the war with Russia and Ukraine, and all pro-Ukrainian, most of them. And they like to hit on China. I can tell you something about that happened in Canada last week about that.
Sure.
But yeah, the propaganda is, I forget what I was going to say because I got sidetracked about the Canadian thing. let me just segue into that while I'm at it. The narrative, maybe about 3 years ago, as when Meng Wanzhou was arrested, you remember that incident where the head of Huawei, the chief financial officer, Meng Wanzhou, was arrested by the Canadians on American orders and detained for 3 years here.
Yep.
To be extradited to the States, and finally there was a deal made and she went back to China. But at the same time she was arrested, the Chinese arrested 2 Canadian diplomats, or a diplomat and one other fellow.
That story, just the 2 Michaels or something like that.
Right, the 2 Michaels. And the Chinese accused them of spying. And there was a big hullabaloo here and in the States that, China was arresting them falsely. There was no justice in China. The justice system was fascist, so on and so forth. And denied it and smeared China and said they did it in revenge for Meng Wanzhou's arrest. Well, now it comes out that one of the 2 alleged spies has sued the government in Canada, the Canadian government, for damages because he says that they linked him up with a spy, the other Michael, who was a spy. He's got proof that he was a spy. And the Globe and Mail has further proof that he was an intelligence officer gathering information in China. Therefore, the Chinese were correct. And then they linked him up. He said, I was giving him information, but inadvertently. Well, why he was giving him information I don't know. That's also, I think they were both spies myself. But anyway, but the Canadian government holds firm and still says that the Chinese are lying, even in face of the spies themselves saying we were spies.
Who are you going to believe? Your lying eyes?
Yeah.
That is an amazing story. The 2 Michaels. I think it broke this week, maybe late last week. But yeah.
And the propaganda for these wars is never changing. A big scandal here also about the singer Buffy St. Marie. CBC attacked her, but they got proof that she's not Canadian or Indigenous. So, and then she's trying to defend herself. So that was a big shock here too, because she was quite famous here. And we found out she's not even Canadian.
She's a politician or a celebrity?
She's a
singer. She did a very famous, she's a very, I think, good singer. And she wrote a very famous song, which in the 70s, The Universal Soldier, which is an anti-war song, a very good one. But she's always she claimed at first that she was Micmac from Eastern Canada. Then she claimed she was Algonquin from Northern Ontario here. Then she claimed she was Cree from Western Canada. And she's maintained that ever since. But they found out her birth certificate. She was born in Massachusetts to an Italian father and English mother. And that was on her marriage certificate, birth certificate, insurance policies. But she's always claimed she was Indigenous. She's being given awards here as a Canadian native. And now people are very upset about that. So people are being bamboozled and taken in many ways. So now we have the spies saying we were really spies. The Canadian government's lying. And you begin to wonder what really is the truth in this world.
So the Canadians you interact with, I'm not going to say public opinion, but those who you speak with, even though the cracks are appearing on the China narrative, that's sort of, they're still aboard. They're still aboard with Ukraine and the Israel stories.
But yes, that's right. That brings me back on track. Thanks, Ben. But as far as Israel, I went to see my doctor last week. It was a checkup, and I was in the waiting room. There's all these old guys like me in there. And one guy came in and said to somebody, "You've been watching the news about what the hell's going on in Palestine, what the Israelis are doing to those people?" And everybody says, "Yeah, it's terrible, it's terrible." And one guy said, "You really think so?" And he said, "Yeah, you got to watch the news." And I turned around and said, "Yeah, I agree with you." And everybody else in the waiting room agreed. Mm-hmm. Now, you would not get that about China and Russia.
Yeah.
But this one, the images, I think, is so stark and so horrible. And they can't, and the bombing is so intense, and they can't understand. Nobody can understand the rhyme or reason for it. So it's too bad that they don't feel the same way about what's going on in Russia. But nevertheless, it is that's why I said maybe Biden is right. He claimed to justify his war that out of wars, wars sometimes good things come out of wars, so war is good. Yeah. He's like Dr. Pangloss or somebody. I don't know. But maybe he was right in a way, because war sometimes, that's why I went back to Lenin and those people. War sometimes bring revolutionary transformations. And maybe we're seeing a change in the public view of what's going on in the world, that their eyes are being opened through this doorway and this window, and maybe they can expand their view if they look more deeply. But maybe it's a chance for the world to begin, so that the U.S. narrative on Ukraine is falling apart or will fall apart. And the same with China will fall apart, because people will say, well, if they're lying to us about this, maybe
it's different in Canada, but in Europe, the Ukraine narrative is shifting. But I wanted to ask, who do you suspect actually wrote the Biden op-ed? Or maybe I can narrow it down. Sullivan, Blinken?
probably Blinken, but
one
I
of
think
those
he's
is
the
who
vote. Yeah, or some lowly clerk who was assigned to do it by them. Yeah, somebody.
Yeah, staffers. They have all these ideological staffers that, you know, are the nuts and bolts of their.
Right.
Yeah, they have the figureheads, but then the staffers are the people that do most of the work. That would be my guess.
They're
Yeah.
speechwriters.
Yeah,
Speech
staff writers. Yeah,
That's their job, speech writing.
Who will
J.D.
make a name
Salinger.
for themselves, and then they'll, you know, they'll be the figureheads after a while. You know, after they pay their dues as the staffers. That's kind of how it works.
Yeah,
To
I'm
an
sorry.
extent.
But they'll do the same for the Center for the Study
Excuse
of War, CSI, or the Australian versions, the ASBI, and they'll go into these think tanks.
Not J.D. Pierre Salinger was the famous speechwriter for Kennedy. I'm sorry.
That's right. Yeah.
I also got Harbinger, Texas wrong. It was Harlingen, Texas. You have to forgive me.
Yeah, J.D. Salinger. Pierre Salinger. There was not J.D.
Pierre
Salinger, right? Pierre Salinger. Wasn't he was also Canadian born or something, Pierre Salinger? Or was he French?
Right.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
I forget the name of Bush's famous speechwriter. He had he's just he's an establishment liberal. I forget his name. He had a debate with the guy that Carlo is always hating on, that you know, one of Trump's advisors.
Bannon,
yeah, he had a debate with Bannon in Canada one time, and it was interesting. I forget his name, so that doesn't help. What we're kind of describing today is how the Western imperialism is kind of just painting itself in a corner on all these issues. And they have this PR, you know, propaganda apparatus that is putting out all these narratives, but they're all lies. And eventually they're going to find themselves stuck. I mean, pretty soon, I think they're going to find themselves stuck. And what are they going to do to get themselves out of this corner they're painted into? So to me, that's a real interesting and fascinating question that I would like to hear people's thoughts on.
I think you're.
Go ahead, Christopher.
I agree that they're into a corner. I mean, the war in Ukraine is, the Russians have pretty much won that. I mean, it's just a matter of time. I think Advieka will fall within a week or so, the way things are going, maybe 2 weeks or so. But they're actually fighting inside the city now, and they're advancing all along the contact line. The Russians are advancing, and the lack of support. I mean, for Austin to say that he only is going to give $100 million to Ukraine, that calculates out to maybe 1 day's worth of bullets and bombs.
And it has one HIMARS launcher.
One HIMARS launcher when they destroyed all the rest. I mean, it's just a nothing. It's laughable. And then he said, well, the Europeans are going to step in, and, you know, Germany's going to send this and that, and they promised something. But they are in a corner. They've lost this war. And the Israeli conflict is convenient in a way, because I don't say it was planned, right? But the Hamas attack has drawn attention away from the defeat of NATO and the United States in Ukraine. And they are in a corner they don't know how to get out of, because Europe is being destroyed economically because of the sanctions. They've really lost the war, and how that's going to end up is not clear, but they've lost the war. And Israel is not doing so well against the Palestinians. So despite the fact they have these aircraft battle carrier groups in the Middle East and the Red Sea, they're not really doing anything except an implied threat, I guess, to Iran. But what are they accomplishing? And what's all this money doing for the American people, the Canadian people, the European people? The West, the European bloc, Canada, the United States, Australia are locked in a box they don't know how to get out of, except through more war. So you have the Czech president saying we got to build for a bigger war with Russia.
Well, yes. So let's go Taiwan, right?
Taiwan.
The logical next step.
Taiwan, they're still sending arms to Taiwan, but meanwhile, the Chinese are conducting regular exercises to seize Taiwan, which they have the right to do. It's I don't know what's going to happen. I think something will happen, but it's not going to be good. Because the Xi visit to the United States last week was encouraging that they had talked, but did you see Blinken flinch when just after the talks with Xi and
his heart sank.
Yeah, they were buttering up Xi and he's all good and everything's positive, and then Biden tells a reporter that he's a dictator, and if you watch Blinken on that video, he just like, oh my God.
At least
all our work's
times
gone down the hill. So the Chinese know no matter how nice you are and how much the Americans talk, you can't trust them.
True.
And in Israel, the Americans now are complicit in war crimes, and that's another thing that what the Israelis are doing in Gaza amount to attempted extermination of the people, forced transportation of a population, are all war crimes. Indiscriminate bombing of civilian centers, which is a war crime. Bombing hospitals and ambulances is a war crime. Expressing the intent to exterminate the population and partially doing it, which can, by definition, under the ICC statute, be genocide. And the United States is a party to the war because without American help, I think the war would be over by now, because I think the Israelis have gone through a lot of their equipment and fuel and resources. So without the American, that war can be continued. So the Americans are now, the American government, Biden and Blinken, are party to these war crimes, and they could be tried for war crimes.
And so there have been several groups who have brought these claims against the U.S. and Israel to the ICC.
Right, and anybody can. In fact, I encourage people to do that, because you can personally send a letter to the prosecutor of the ICC and demand that they do something. And the more letters they get, the more pressure they'll be under, because right now the prosecutor is really in the pockets of the EU and the USA. But if he faces a lot of pressure, maybe make noises about doing something at least, because they have an open file on Israel already.
True.
But anyway.
Compared to the Arab neighbors, who are still kind of addicted to Western money, you can see that in their hesitations. It was South Africa, post-apartheid South Africa, that voted like overwhelmingly, we're going to close all the embassies, and they are the major force trying to push the ICC to intervene, to condemn. It's wonderful to see. And the one little nation that had the guts to do an energy embargo was Venezuela. Two things to be really, really proud about.
Yeah. So I don't think the ICC will do anything. If you go to their site and read their file on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, they say we find that Israel has committed war crimes. They've committed them in occupied territories, but we're not going to lay charges because we need a fuller investigation, and these investigations take a lot of time. But they didn't do that with Putin, of course.
Oh, that was immediate.
There was no investigation. They didn't do that with President Gbagbo from Ivory Coast. He was arrested by the French and hauled off there without any evidence whatsoever, no investigation. Spent 10 years in jail, but no, they can't do that to Netanyahu. So this is where we are. So like Carl was right. Other people have made complaints to the ICC, and there are moves to establish people's tribunals in various places to do. There was one, Marjorie Cohen, my friend Marjorie Cohen and some others, the National Lawyers Guild, had a people's tribunal in California, I think, last week, and found Netanyahu guilty of war crimes. I think it was Marjorie Cohen and Peter Katz. Anyway, I think they're all lawyers from the National Lawyers Guild, which I think I'm the only Canadian member of that group.
Do you want to see that hypocrisy like condensed into a single conversation? I can share with you.
Sure.
It was amazing. I mean, the guy asks in Arabic, but the answers will be in English.
هل موقف الاتحاد الأوروبي عندما قامت به حماس في 7 من أكتوبر جرائم حرب؟
نعم، نحن نعتبر ذلك جرائم حرب، لأنه قتل المدنيين بشكل واضح من دون أي سبب، قتلهم فقط لأنهم كانوا هناك، ليس لسبب آخر.
To summarize, was what Hamas done on October 7, was that a war crime? Yes, absolutely, we consider it a war crime. Question 2, immediately after.
هل تعتبرون أن ما تقوم به إسرائيل هو جرائم حرب؟
Well, I am not aware.
In the same segment, like what? Just
That's
beautiful.
amazing.
Well,
I was going to say, hypocrisy, Western hypocrisy, U.S. hypocrisy, Israeli hypocrisy, EU hypocrisy. I mean, we could spend days and days and days, pointing out over and over and over again the hypocrisy. What's interesting is, to me, like, what is the West going to do to deal with all these issues? And I mean, I think the military option might be their likely thing. Like, economically speaking, we can continue with the inflation, or we can have a depression, right? I mean, those are kind of the options. Like, so I don't know if they're going to choose one of those. I think they might just go for a large scale conventional war, and then like at the end of World War II, they'll create another kind of a new global economic system, or at least Western economic system, in the fallout of whatever destruction takes place. Like, to me, these psychopaths, that might be what their best option is from their perspective. Reliance on military means to deal with their economic problems, their their PR problems. I don't know.
Yeah, so I fear I don't know. That's what the Czech president said, and you get similar things coming out of Washington and London and Germany. Very aggressive talk about a bigger war. Because really, the Ukraine war, you have to remember, the Ukraine war is not about Ukraine per se, really. It's really a war against Russia by NATO, United States, and its allies. So that even if they lose on the Ukraine front, that war is not going to end. They're going to try and attack Russia in some other way, maybe still using Ukraine, whatever's left of it. But how can they do that physically when their armies are very small and they're broke? I mean, the American army is a fraction of what it was back in the Vietnam War days, or even when they invaded Iraq. The British army is almost non-existent. Canadian army the same. German and French armies, they couldn't field more than 20, 30,000 men. I don't know what this means except going to nuclear war. And that's what is frightening, because the only way they could really defeat Russia or China is through nuclear war, not conventionally. They don't have the means. Well, they could get the means, but they might take 5 or 6 years to develop it. And do they have that time? I don't think so. I think the window for them to win the war, in their view, is very short.
That's
that frightens me.
By the way, that's incidentally kind of a plan, because there's been a lot of articles on there needs to be a ceasefire in Ukraine, meaning they're pressuring Zelensky, Zaluzhny, whoever they pick, to sign up, turn it down, have a little ceasefire in exchange for territory, meaning we can rearm you in the meantime. And Russia is not interested. No, absolutely not interested in anything like that. So their chances of that are limited. But as for the nuclear option, Jesus, can they be that psychopathic?
It never ceased to amaze me. I don't know. I hope not, but
they would seize on some kind of a pretext vis-a-vis Taiwan, using the Philippines also, and economic embargo, implementing an economic embargo against China, stopping the shipping lanes in the South China Sea. A war with Iran would definitely block the Strait of Hormuz, where all kinds of energy comes. But like we talked about before, Russia has a direct pipeline going into China that is going to be difficult for a U.S. Navy to interdict. They can't deal with a land pipeline that connects physically between Russia and China. But I mean, I wish I had faith that the leadership, the ruling class in the United States, would recognize the situation, recognize the hopelessness, recognize that there's centuries or decades at least of lies are no longer, they're no longer able to maintain them. So, come clean, come clean with the American people. Tell them the truth that, our empire is unsustainable, and we're going to have a new world where we're going to, work with other countries to solve humanity's problems. Like, that's what needs to happen. But again, if you even have one politician that says that, so the system itself is, what did Lavrov call it? They're incapable of agreement, incapable of holding to their agreement. And that's not because they don't want to agree. So you understand, it's like the system here isn't just they just don't want to make the decision. Like, they're incapable of making a decision that everybody can get aboard on. There's too many centers of power with too many different interests. And they're agreement incapable, which means that they're incapable of any coming up with any solution to their problems. So this changing world is creating problems for Western imperialism, and they're incapable of addressing these challenges in a coherent, rational, unified way that you would otherwise have to do if you want to be successful. Yeah.
Let me try to address your question in a different way, but more directly to your point, what the world can be rearranged. I mean, they're used to this, all the finance, like what gets developed, what doesn't, who makes what. It used to flow through London, New York, basically. That's it. They decide that Greece, you're going to make cheese and you're going to export this and we get the profits. Niger, that was France, but, part of the appendage of the empire. You're going to make uranium, which, by the way, has gone up, like a 20-year maximum price has been reached in uranium fever. And they used to decide, no, you're going to stay poor. We don't care about you. Most of Yugoslavia are not going to have production, industry, whatever. And that has already been challenged and vastly undermined by the Belt and Road Initiative. So what they can't do, the fortunes they used to have, has just become a normal country. Like America, we're going to make burgers and some weapons and, I don't know, come up with something new and compete with China and Russia. They're not going to do that, because then what happens to BlackRock? What happens to these massive mega fortunes amassed from the plunder of the resources of the world? Like, what was it, 5% of the global population? But when you take into account the resource pull that America had, getting everything from the world, something like 30%, was shocking.
33%. Yeah.
33. And, coming to terms with that ending is something they can't do. Obviously, that's still pessimistic, because then what is plan B? What is plan C if they can't just become a normal country like the rest? And that is what the multipolar world, what China and Russia is pushing for. Become a team player, get along with your neighbors.
But imagine a politician trying to unify the ruling class and all of the various factions that, have overlapping and competing interests. Imagine them running on the idea that, hey, America is going to be a regular country just like any other. Like, is that because American exceptionalism has been driven into people's minds for decades, and it's a religion here. And to come against that religion is going to make you entirely unpopular with not just the electorate, but your donors. Like, you're not going to get money. So this system is fucked.
That word came back from 2001 also. I'm blanking. Was it essential? The essential country? Or was it another word?
Yeah, the essential country, the indispensable country, the indispensable country.
Yeah.
Which is a very colonialist attitude that we're above everybody else and everybody else is beneath us.
And that's the lie that nobody can stick their neck out and say, that's not true. Because if they try and do that, they're going to get their head cut off. And that's why this system is agreement incapable. That's why they can't do the right thing. So what the fuck are they going to do? That's my question.
I like it when you get worked up.
As Christopher has it in the last paragraph of his article, he writes, the United States has lost its pretended moral leadership and has been exposed for what it is to most of the world. But here in the U.S., we live under tremendous stress, the general population. I can attest to how stressful it is to try to live in this culture. I'm sure Billy Bob can too. Because
the same.
There is this vast wealth accrued but it's certainly not it's certainly not dealt in any equitable way to the general population. I mean, the number of people living on the streets in the U.S. is enormous. So even if the United States came clean, like Christopher says, their moral leadership, the emperor has no clothes. There are structures where uh, the day-to-day life in the U.S. could actually improve rather than become worse because of the inequities and the insufficiencies and the theft and the greed that takes place now. And it's so it wouldn't require 33% of the world's um, of the world's goods to maintain what it has. It could maintain it. One of the things I do, and I'm going to get a little off base here, is I'm very intrigued by these what are called Earth ships, and I don't know if any of you are aware of them, but these are self-sustaining houses built in the Arizona desert, built actually in Canada. A lot of them have been built in Canada, where people live off the grid in these self-sustainable houses where they grow a percentage of their own food in the house, in a hot house, where they use the water 4 times. They have an annual rain of about 13 inches, and they recycle it. They use it once for drinking, then they use it for washing the dishes and bathing. Then they use it in their toilets, and then the toilet water runs out into the desert, which allows plants to bloom out there, which are not edible, but they filter all the water used for bathing and washing dishes and doing laundry and so forth, and it runs in an underground canal in the front of the house where it's gathering eastern light, and they grow tomatoes and bananas in winter. I mean, it's fantastic. Now, I'm not recommending this for everybody, and the labor involved in building one of these places, because they used used tires, they filled with sand and and held together with they're stacked together and use concrete, and and they use cans, they use empty beer cans, empty bottles. They use refuse for a lot of the building materials, and they're very difficult, and they require a huge amount of labor. But still, those things leave a zero footprint. What do you call your carbon footprint? Zero, or near zero, and they're self-sustainable, and so there's a huge gap between the way Americans are living now, which is utterly wasteful, and at the top it's beyond utterly wasteful. It's disgraceful, and I don't think if America was smart at all, and it's really a stupid country filled with stupid people, and we talk about we talk about like U.S. losing its moral authority, or what's gone on in Ukraine, and frankly, 95 or 96% of the American population, they don't know. They couldn't spell or find Ukraine on a map even now. It's just that way. So
they wouldn't put an E on the end of Ukraine. They don't know.
it would take it's there. The raw material is there, but it would take an enormous change in the U.S. to get it to a point where it could find itself
capable of the
self-sustaining.
systemic change that's necessary. I mean,
yeah, it's
well, was Luxembourg said it's socialism or barbarism, and we're witnessing the barbarism.
Barbarism, yes.
And then and in Canada, we're seeing the same. They're privatizing healthcare gradually. The local paper, which is a very right-wing paper, put out an editorial calling our healthcare system a Soviet-style healthcare system. This is where it's going here. And it's just unbelievable. We've had free healthcare here for 70 years. Now they're saying, And you got this fascist elected in Argentina with American support.
Milei.
It's going to be a nightmare for South America.
Hey, we have
Argentina
one in
anyway.
Europe with the same weird hair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what Billy Bob's question? What are we get? What are they going to do? I don't know, because you're right. Before 1940, the United States was still under the Depression, and it had been through several boom and busts from the 1840s on. That lasted almost 10, 15 years. Only the Second World War brought the United States out of that, and the continuous wars since, and seizing all these resources, control of the world, has allowed the American population to live as well as it has, at least some people there. But then it's gradually falling apart, so you get more and more poverty, and the policies create that. Same in Canada's developing. Same in Britain's a mess now. Europe's falling the same way. So what is their solution? They're not going to switch to socialism. Not allow it anyway. So what is their answer? Just war. As Marx said, war is always the answer for capitalists. And Lenin, I think it's true. I think that I don't. If you were in a room with watching a fly on the wall with Blinken and everybody talking, and with their friends in Europe, I bet they're talking about a bigger war. Because what else? How else are we going to survive as the top dog unless we have a war and win? Because if we don't, we're going to be the underdog. So that's how they see it. So I'm not optimistic, really.
You probably won't be surprised that the bulwark, the main proponent of social democracy in Europe, which is Scandinavia, is doing the same to its healthcare system as Canadians are, rolling back the concessions they were once forced to give. Basically, they're rolling it all back. I wanted to, it's not pushed back, but as long as we have some time and we're just chatting to Carlo's idea, because that doesn't sound like socialism to me. It's uniquely American, this sort of net zero retreat, not retreat, but self-sustaining lifestyle in the Arizona desert. Because, a society will need penicillin, it will need microchips, and you can't just grow those in the Arizona desert. For that, you need what socialism is huge scale cooperation and the creation of abundance. And I really don't see that in that idea, nor do I see it articulated in the US left or progressive circles. I see a lot of this climate zero rhetoric, but I don't see the creation of what, for example, China has. Not pushback, just thoughts,
No, but what's interesting about the people who live there is they're very much involved in if you will, high tech, the tech industry. These are not stupid people living in the Arizona. These are not hippies who, are going back to the earth. These are people who are extremely, extremely savvy when it comes to the use of computers. They often have mainstream jobs that arise out of Silicon Valley. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily a good thing, but it should be pointed out that this is not a this is not a kind of isolationist movement.
I didn't mean to say that. What I meant to say that is, if they have computers because they're savvy, there's a huge industrial chain leading to that computer. And
yeah, I mean, in Carlo's defense, not that you were, attacking him, but no, I mean, Carlo said it's not a solution, and it's something interesting.
It's not for everyone,
but it's not a solution to our problems.
And they're the first to say that, by the way.
Yeah.
But anyway,
but conditions are deteriorating across the Western world for the average working class person. Things are getting much worse. I mean, I guess in the States here, food prices here are astronomical. We're now having to pay for medical services we've never paid for before. And we can see it getting worse and worse. Housing costs, although the housing prices actually crashed in the last year, leaving tens of thousands of people with mortgages which are more than the value of the house, and they can't afford the mortgages because of high interest rates. And yet Canada is going to import another 500,000 immigrants into the country to put them where we don't know, and for what reason. Well, they actually say the reason. They bring it into ease labor shortages, which means they want to drive down wages even further.
Undermine labor costs.
Undermine labor costs, yeah. And those that defend it, if you object to that, then you're accused of being anti-immigrant. Well, I'm an immigrant, so that's hard to do. That's what they're doing. They're deliberately, since the Soviet Union collapsed, they've been gradually withdrawing all the concessions, as Ben rightly said, they gave to the working class with the existence of the Soviet Union. That's been taken away. They told us socialism doesn't work, so they're gradually clawing back all those things they gave us: free education, free healthcare, because we don't need it. Doesn't work. It's more efficient to pay for everything, even though you get things for free now. Now you got to pay, and people are buying this. I can't believe the stupidity of people. You've had free healthcare here, say, for all our lives, and it's worked. It's been very good. Same in Britain, Germany, and France. And now, oh, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And people are, yeah, it doesn't work. Well, why? Because they stopped funding it.
Yeah.
To make you complain about it, therefore demand private healthcare, which is much more expensive. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes I lose faith in humanity that they can even reason or think about anything.
Yeah.
Well, the good news is at least Russia is going the absolute opposite direction. 2024 has been declared the year of the family. Yeah. And a lot of that, I mean, if you talk to Russians, they're sure they had some economic and other benefits, but that's not what they cry about. What the Soviet-hearted, the old ones.
I saw an interesting...
The life, the sentiment of living among brotherly nations and caring for each other is what they really, really miss. And that's not something Putin can ignore, you know. And I'm really glad they're... Yeah, go.
Michael Hudson had an interesting interview on an hour and a half interview he gave. I forget who it was. Maybe you saw it. But he was asked about what does he think Russia is, a semi-socialist state, a capitalist state, or still socialist state, and he said it's in between. It's never really gone fully capitalist. You can't say it's socialist, but it still retains a lot of the Soviet infrastructure and economic mechanisms and political mechanisms. Housing for many people is still free, though they privatize a lot of housing, but many people survive on very low wages because housing is still basically very cheap or free. The head of the Duma, one important lady, I forget her name now, stated that next year they propose to give free housing, apartments and houses to anybody who decides to have 3 children.
Yes, the year of the family.
So I don't know why they want to start it at 3. Why not start it with 0 and give every couple a free house and free apartment? That would encourage them to have babies, not wait till they got 2 already. But the idea is still there. So they still have these ideas. And the fact that they've been able to ramp up their arms industry so quickly means it's because they still have those mechanisms in place. Not all the industry is being privatized. Some of it's still nationalized, and they're renationalizing some of the things. So they have aspects of the socialist outlook. You can see it as family-oriented or nostalgia for the Soviet times, but there's still this heavy influence they haven't. And of course, who are all their allies? All the allies of Russia are socialist states: China, Vietnam, Laos, North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, Cuba, Honduras, El Salvador. It's a bit odd that there's this capitalist, so-called capitalist state. Its main allies are all communists or socialists. So that's got to have a reciprocal influence on Russian thinking by economists and Paul. And I think we're seeing that. So I'm not sure what's going to go on there, but I think it's going to end up being a mixed economy, and there's some good aspects for it. But we won't even attain that here in the West. We won't even attain what they've got. We're regressing back the other way.
And I think, just a quick thought from Europe, because I don't know if you've seen, we have a new bureau here, which is the Defensive Sovereignty Bureau that Orban inked this Tuesday. And it's basically the Belarusian model or the Russian model. By the way, the US has the same. The same that was created in Hong Kong by China. If you're funded by a foreign government, you can get 3 years in jail if you're a politician, or if you're an organization, you get fucking shut down. As Lukashenko said, we'll eviscerate your NGOs, and that's a really welcome step. Even though, you know, the Hungarian economy is still a pretty kleptocratic, pretty much geared towards the German auto industry, and that can't be changed in like a year. They're trying to orient eastwards, but if they actually get into the club of the emerging Belt and Road, the BRICS, the SCO, and all that, I think they will have to make something similar that Russia did. We also have that past, 40 years of it.
Yeah.
There's my hope, of obviously full of caution and fear, but I do have that hope. Yeah.
It seems like a very prudent move on behalf of any government that wants, sovereignty and not to be, dominated by the U.S. and have, their puppet strings pulled by the U.S. But I think the U.S., generally speaking, is incapable of building or creating anything, right? I think going forward, the idea is going to be to destroy what others are trying to build. And so, the U.S. is going to feel some pain, and they're going to lash out, and they're going to try and harm the interests of China, the interests of Russia. They're going to try and bring that pain, around the world, and then use their PR machine, their propaganda apparatus to blame China for the global pain that the U.S. is going to try and cause, and to blame Russia for the global pain. So I think going forward, we're going to see that. And I think probably we're going to see a Pearl Harbor type event, a 9/11 type event that can just be, really manipulated and leveraged by the propaganda apparatus to justify, whatever reaction the U.S. is going to, whatever strategy they have in mind. But it's going to be interesting. I don't think we're going to have to wait too long before we see exactly what the strategy is and how it unfolds. But
I hope not, but you could well be right. I'm sure you guys seen the story about, it's between Canada and the US, what is it called? Rainbow Bridge above the Niagara Falls.
Yeah,
You've seen that?
Yeah.
Within half an hour, Fox News said terrorism. There was first an Iranian passport, then a Yemeni passport, and then it was not terrorism, no explosion, nothing. So who knows what the future holds? But yeah,
the media is just anxious. They're just anxious to help, further whatever agenda the ruling class comes up with. And so they're jumping at the chance to blame Iran and, to start a war and bring chaos, destroy, kill. They can't wait.
Yeah, I try and follow what's going on with your elections there, though I don't see anybody discussing any economic platform or what the program is for the people. There's no mention of it. I get this guy Suwami or this Indian fellow saying there's got to be a wall across the Canadian border now. That's their ideas. It's just
and he's one of the sane ones. They also have Nikki Haley.
Like you give up, you have to shake your head.
The least sane.
Like these people have no ideas at all. They're just totally bankrupt. What are we going to do for the average person? Don't they look around and see how people really live? Why are there thousands of people on the streets? We have them now here in Toronto and Hamilton around here. We have people living on the streets I've never seen before the last 2 or 3 years. I told I was in Vienna, a guy from Istanbul. It must be very nice in Canada. So you got, not like the United States, no homeless there. I said, no, we got homeless people on the streets in Canada. I said, yes. Oh my God. Is that bad? I said, yeah, it's that bad. People don't realize. But there's no ideas. What are they doing? Instead, they're bringing in more people they can't take care of.
I have an idea. Invite Xi Jinping and ask him to stay for a year.
All things would change. That's for sure. There's just no.
People here are being convinced they want to live in what are called tiny houses that are 160 square feet, 250 square feet total.
Oh, wow.
Total. Some are living with 2 children in these tiny houses, and they're still paying $75,000, $80,000 for the house. Then they have to pay a rent on the lot that they put the house on. The stress is just enormous on people here.
Same here. People are buying houses. What would it cost $100,000, say 10 years ago? Now they're $1 million. So they're nothing, just a bungalow, really. And yet, to pay for those houses, those people are renting out their basements to another family or another room to somebody else. It's like Dickensian times. They're really living in poverty, but they don't think they are because their house value is this. But they're really living like they're in slums.
Yeah.
Wait for
I
it to
saw
shrink.
a Facebook video that was showing us how we can really make a dumpster fancy. How we can live in a dumpster and we can make it nice. Like we can put a bed. There's a little desk next to the bed. Like it's amazing what you can do with a dumpster. So
our cargo container.
Right.
I was going to say I was being generous because I thought of the container homes that I've seen in Europe, by the way, like gaining traction. And then there's going to be the Japanese-inspired, basically pod homes. You know, they had the pod hotels, but basically it's a bed and maybe a shared loo, and that's it.
My God!
But up here it gets cold in the winter. For down, you know, you can't go down to people here can't go to Florida or California to survive the winter here. I don't know. It's even worse for people up here.
Well, this is a very positive program now.
Well, we're here to tell people reality. I mean, the fact is, we don't want to spoon feed them dreams about unreality.
I think the point is, it's like the whole culture can be washed away at its foundation, and that might lead to some drastic changes here. I mean, to me, it seems like it's hitting a critical point. Maybe it's because I've been ill for so long that I'm starting to like feel that sense in my own being. But it's like it's almost reaching a breaking point. And the corporation heads here, they go, oh well, COVID and supporting Ukraine have given us this opportunity to jack up prices, and there's no reason we've jacked them up this high, but people are paying them. We're so surprised. People are paying the prices, and they are. And I think there has to come a point where that's not going to be viable anymore, and the whole foundation, the general population, is just going to which is really the basis on which it's all built. It's a consumer culture. Is going to get washed away. It's in debt. And at that point, when you have majorities of people living on the streets who can't make it, then you're going to see. It's not going to be pretty, but there's going to be some sort of change. We have instruments, political instruments for that right now. They're called Donald Trump. They're called Steve Bannon, who has expressed an interest in seeing that happen and has been working assiduously to bring that about. And to me, it seems effortless with all the help he's getting from all the people who exemplify greed in this culture, just abject greed. And I think they meant wash the whole thing away. We had Tony Montero on a couple of weeks ago, and he asked me what he thought we should do about what was happening here. And I said, just let it collapse on its own. And he disagreed with that. He has a modest organization. I don't have any organization, so I don't have any of that kind of hope that there's another way out. To me, it seems like it's like apocalyptic almost. That what's going to happen here culture wise. The stress and the strain on people is enormous, and I see it every day. So that's what I think is in the cards here for these assholes at the top who are pontificating and stealing, dramatically stealing.
I hope
from everyone else.
I hope you're right, especially about the people at the top. I won't comment on Trump or Bannon, but Europe is very, very similar. We're not as bad. We don't have socks behind bulletproof glass at the supermarkets like I've seen in the US in videos, which is really like, what? But most of the articles, especially UK and Germany, were like that the lifestyle you enjoyed, it's over. They're preparing people for no. We're not going to live that comfortably anymore. That was the past era.
Easy bugs, yeah.
You can tie that in with it, but the cultural collapse of what people have been used to for at least the last 30 years here, that's going to be abrupt. It's going to hurt. There's a reason why there's a lot of violence erupting, including in Europe. Sure, you can place on the stress of what immigration, but it's people who said, "Look, I was promised." My work, my whatever, my lifestyle would be maintained, and it's not under these energy prices, the food prices, the thing. That's an ugly big slap in the face to a lot of people.
So you got the richest 0.1%. So, I mean, I've said this many times, but the richest 0.1%, not the richest 1%, the richest 0.1% have more wealth, account for more wealth than the poorest 90% in the United States. So we're super rich. Like, we're one of the wealthiest countries in the world, but all that wealth is at the very, very top. So the 0.1%. So capitalism is a system of government that is of, by, and for those people who have all the capital. So our system, it doesn't really care about the worsening conditions in the quality of life of the vast majority of the working class. But at the same time, you know, it's an issue because they don't want to push people to the point where we become ungovernable, or, you know, we resist and try and replace their capitalist, you know, the dictatorship of capital with a government of, by, and for, you know, the working class. So, but that's the solution. The solution isn't small homes. It's not creating a dumpster that can accommodate, you know, a family of 3. The solution is to overthrow this dictatorship of capital and replace it with a working class government. I mean, that's it. A government of, by, and for the people, like China has done, like Nicaragua has done, like Cuba has done. Now, I know that we're not a revolutionary people, but we can at least threaten these fuckers and demand some fucking reforms and demand some fucking, you know, some rationality in their approach to global conflict. You know, stop trying to destroy everything. Stop trying to control the fucking world and fucking take your place as just another fucking country. Go ahead, Carlos. Sorry.
No, that's all right. But we talked about Argentina and this clown that's now president there.
Yeah.
Well, what is Argentina's? Why do 40% of Argentinians live under the poverty line? Because of the IMF and the World Bank and all of that borrowing they did over the years.
Yeah.
And then those institutions come in and they institute austerity programs and structural adjustment loans, and that further bankrupts the population who's required to pay back this debt. And so then you end up with the kind of leadership or lack of leadership that now Argentina has, because people are desperate for some kind of change. And the parallel for me is Trump.
It's the Trump phenomenon, the wrecking ball. We want,
I mean, look at Venezuela. Venezuela is building apartments from people living in the favelas. They now get an apartment, and depending on what their income is or the potential income, that determines what they pay monthly for the apartment. And they're fairly nice apartments. They're not elaborate apartments, but they're nicer than living, you know, on a hillside that you know, when you have to haul water up 200 feet to your house. So it's a whole different mindset.
They get their puppets in place in places like Argentina. They cripple it with debt. They exploit it. And then they try and blame government. And that's what opens up for clowns like this guy in Argentina, who their whole thing is government's the problem. We just got to get rid of government. This is the libertarian ignorance that permeates, you know, Western culture. It's just like the problem is government. It's not these rich people corrupting government and misusing it for their own benefit, not giving a fuck about everybody else. No, the problem is actually government itself. Like, this thinking is just ridiculous.
He's even worse. Javier Milei, he's an anarcho-capitalist, and therefore he wants to abolish a whole lot of ministries. In 2023, he wants to dollarize the economy, like the opposite of the trend worldwide. And that's going to, I mean, real economy, the effect on people's lives, that's going to hit like a truck. If this guy gets away with half of what he wants, it's going to be interesting.
And his biggest benefactor is a billionaire, right? He's got this oligarch that promotes him and has a media empire that he uses, not that differently from what happened in Ukraine with Zelensky.
That's why your program is so important, because one of the problems with the working class organizing and taking power, as they did in the Soviet Union and other places, and tried to do here in the 30s and 40s and 50s, is the control of the propaganda narrative in the media. I mean, they got complete control of the entire media, except for independent outlets like yours. So most people are manipulated into thinking that's the way to go. I asked my friend, a doctor in Argentina I'm in contact with, why did 55% of people vote for this guy? And she said, because there's a lot of fascists here, a lot of Nazis.
It was a favored destination.
Yeah, it was. It's just they've destroyed the education system here in the last 20 years. Young people are ignorant. They don't know history. They don't know anything. And they've been promised this and that. And the conditions are bad because inflation is 120%. So this government we got doesn't give the answers. So we go for this guy. Same in Germany, they're supporting the RDF because the communists don't really exist as an organized force to any great extent there now. So they support other parties which claim to have these policies which they favor, which may be in some ways good for the working class. But I don't know how we're going to do that. I've been an organized left most of my life, but Canada's going the same way. All the major parties, except for the small Communist Party, are all swinging far to the right. The NDP, which is the Labour Party, has gone to the right. The Green Party, the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party is really a fascist party now. Yeah, sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I thought Trudeau was as bad as it can get, but it sounds like that.
Oh no, it's worse than him. I mean, I don't like Trudeau or what the Liberals have done at all. But what comes after them, after the deluge, is even worse. You know, this guy Poilievre, he's far to the right of Trump. I mean,
after me the deluge.
He says Trudeau's a socialist. And the socialist policies. I mean, Oh my God, this is where we're going. Which is what you hear from Trump. You know, the Democrats are socialists or leftists or not. I mean,
Kamala's a Marxist. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, anything to confuse people. Wow.
That's what it is. It's about, misrepresenting political reality, keeping people ignorant and dumbed down, and advocating against their own best interest. But they can push too far and they can piss people off. And but yeah, like Carlo has the fear that that's gonna end up bad for minorities, and that's a rational fear. That's an understandable fear.
Also, when it comes into conflict with paying your bills, paying for heating, paying for food, that's when a government that's different. That's when they have to fucking think.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so it may be that as Billy Bob says, that the war is coming because that's what they need. That's how they see it. To solve their problem, to solve this crisis they're in. They can't go ahead because the pressure from the working class and so-called middle class is building as conditions get worse and worse. They don't have an answer for those people except war. They don't want working people to take power. That would be an anathema to them. So what is the answer except war? I hope we're wrong, and that out of these present wars comes a movement or a reaction which kicks these people out. But how? And by what mechanism? By what organization? Is it going to be called some sort of, like in the American War of Independence? You had people get together and organize it. In the French Revolution, there was the convention which began it all. There had to be some catalyst which actually coalesces people with the same thoughts together, and then they decide to do things. I don't see that happening in Canada or the United States or Britain right now, except maybe out of a war.
Yeah.
Well, there's all kinds of forms of low intensity conflict too. That are always ongoing, that the U.S. is always involved.
Yeah.
And then there's, of course, you take a look at the Philippines and the way the United States has manipulated the Philippines. And
Marcos.
And after a little slippage with Mrs. Aquino, they've come back very strong. Subic Bay is open again. They're opening a new military base in the Philippines. It's like Frederick Funston, capturing Aguinaldo back in the turn of the century, or Ed Lansdale and Magsaysay, in the defeat of the Hucks. It's like the U.S. can maintain this kind of low intensity conflict control of areas, and at least that won't break out into huge warfare. But it's almost mind blowing how much of this goes on, how much of that subversive
Asymmetrical.
asymmetrical warfare goes on uh, at the with the U.S. behind it.
Yeah.
It's astounding. It's everywhere, and it's mind-boggling. You can't keep up with it.
But it's not to the point where it is causing economic damage to China, and so they got to raise it to that level. Start causing pain around the world to our adversaries or our competitors. So that's the future that, I mean, it seems inescapable. But I am ready to wrap it up because we've been going for an hour and a half. We've taken Chris Black's time. Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
Concluding thoughts, maybe?
Yeah,
You should start.
for sure.
Well,
I was going to say, go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking back to the Roman times when the Roman Senate kept demanding the Carthage has to be destroyed because it was a rival to the Roman Empire. I wonder, in this situation, who is Carthage? I mean, do the Chinese and Russians think this way? Carthage, the United States is a thorn in our side. It has to go. Or is it the United States thinking that way about the rest of the world, which they want, and by destroying the rest of the world, destroy themselves? I don't know.
Yeah, I think they can think whatever they want. Short of the nuclear weapon option, I refuse to accept that these billionaires and mega wealth people are willing to die to keep their rule intact. There's a big realization. It happened first in Ukraine that, the Russian army is not the same as goat herds in Afghanistan or people at weddings. And the Chinese army is more of the same. So there's things they cannot do. They simply can't. They don't have the means. They can't 3D print fucking weapons, missiles. They've already proven that. So I don't think that a direct confrontation is really, really in the cards unless they're incredibly stupid. As Carlo said, low intensity conflict, something that doesn't affect a lot of morale at home and the lifestyles at home. Sure, they can keep that up, but there's a limit to what they can achieve with that. So I'm still cautiously optimistic, even though, yeah, of course I'm worried.
Any final thoughts, Carlo, before I...
No, I like what Ben said at the end there. I think that actually there may be a chance that the United States will just simply allow China to continue to develop, and there'll be a slow fade. Uh, there's plenty of room for restructuring, but there doesn't seem to be anyone out there in a position of authority that'll do that. But I just China's like a beacon to the world right now, and I don't think it's really stoppable. I'll just end it here. I mean, Christopher Talks alluded to it with this notion that Biden and the U.S. is going to jump in the Middle East and begin to be concerned about infrastructure rather than destroying everything, and really they're trying to take a little bit of the shine away from the Chinese, but they won't do that. There'll be no willingness on the apparatus that's there to do that. That is the corporate structure. They will not step in and do the kind of serious building that the Chinese are doing. So
yeah, they don't have the capacity. That's definitely out of the cards.
It's gone. It's not there.
The biggest weapon they have is the propaganda apparatus. We talked about that earlier. It's impossible to exaggerate how powerful it is and how it can just affect people's thoughts and opinions. So that's one reason to like and share this podcast. And I appreciate everybody watching at home and joining us. We will be back Tuesday. We did not go live last Tuesday, but we plan on going live this coming Tuesday. I just want to thank everybody once again. Chris, Carlo, Ben, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back next week. Thank you.
Shout out to Shaniqua. I saw her.
Shaniqua, our number one fan. Oh, see, I'm promoting myself. She said she liked what Billy was. Okay, guys, see you next week. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.